Mayors of the United States Conference of Mayors to the Urban Economics Committee, and perhaps we can begin with introductions. Why don't we just go around the table, and if you would introduce yourself. Mayor Rosenbaum, would you like to begin?
I'm Alfred Rosenbaum, Mayor of Meridian, Mississippi.
John Rosicus, Mayor of Savannah, Georgia.
Bob Madsen, Mayor of Ogden, Utah.
Dan Grisette, Mayor of Santa Ana, California.
John Borg, Mayor of Joliet, Illinois.
Bob Isaac, Mayor of Colorado Springs, Colorado.
Win Moses, Fort Wayne, Indiana.
Don Erickson, Cheyenne, Wyoming.
Jan Coggeshall, Galveston Island, Texas.
Joe Riley, Charleston, South Carolina.
Harry Kenny, Albuquerque. John Mercer, Sunnyvale, California.
Fran Ulmer, Juneau, Alaska, and welcome.
Joe Sensenbrenner, Madison, Wisconsin.
All right, thank you very much. We essentially have two major items on the agenda this morning, and I'd like to just briefly, in the opening remarks, according to me, comment on both of them. One of them is a consideration of the Urban Policy Report, and the other is a report of the Task Force on Tax Reform. You have resolutions for both in your packet. I think with respect to the resolution on tax reform, it's my hope, and I was just talking to Mayor Moses, and the resolution in the packet does not do this. It's my hope that the committee would be able to make some positive comments on the subject of tax reform. I think a proposal which in essence benefits 80% of the people of this nation by Treasury Department figures and analysis is worthy of some close inspection, and really more than the resolution puts forward by way of support of this body. Those of us that happen to be from large producing tax states, and I happen to be one of them, and a big tax city, it's a problem with respect to the removal of the deduction of the state and local taxes. But I think one of the things that's clear from the proposal and all of the analyses is that the tax reform proposal does benefit very strongly those who make less than $30,000 a year. And in terms of public policy, that's a very important concept that can't be overlooked. And I know I, for one, and I speak as somebody that is not of the Republican persuasion, I, for one, would like to see tax reform get started. And I think it helps our credibility. And I think when we talk about increasing taxes all the time, we strongly turn off the American electorate. I just say that to put right on the table my concern that any resolution that this committee puts forward has an opportunity to make some strong arguments on behalf of tax reform. Tax reform has been tried and it's failed every time. And this is really the first proposal that doesn't raise taxes to achieve reform. And as such, is a very, very important and significant proposal.
We have been very concerned on the task force in how to emphasize sufficiently our concern about eliminating the deductibility of state and local taxes. And that was the focus of most of our discussion yesterday. And I agree with Mayor Feinstein's observation that we should have a positive acknowledgement that tax reform is necessary and appropriate, and that there are many elements in the administration's plan and other plans that are being considered which would be positive for the citizens of America who live in cities. And I think we should work on language to that effect. But we were very concerned about a number of the proposals in the administration proposal that would concern local government. The task force began its work essentially 2 weeks ago in Washington when we had the national teleconference where we reviewed a number of changes that were being proposed in the relationship between the cities and the federal government through the tax system. And as a result of those discussions and prior work, have proposed a resolution which was discussed yesterday and is in your packet as resolution number 3, which we can get to when we get to discussing the resolution specifically. There are a number of changes in there, but by far the most damaging and the most threatening change is the elimination of deductibility for state and local taxes.
Yeah, we do. It says, further resolved, impose higher minimum taxes on high-income corporations and individuals. Number 15.
We don't have any taxes on existing tax policy.
And you're right, we're talking about two separate instances, existing versus what is proposed. And in the proposed, we're saying, be it resolved that they have a higher minimum tax.
All right, any further questions of the, yes, Mayor Mercer?
Yeah, one of the concerns I have is that on the one hand, we talk about high-income people who don't pay any taxes, and then on the other hand, we turn around and demand that the federal government retain the exemption for municipal bonds. And my understanding is that a lot of the people who don't pay any federal taxes, the reason is because they've invested in municipal bonds. And yet I don't get any sense from reading these resolutions, any of them, that would recognize that that's part of the reason. Part of the reason that high-income people don't pay taxes is because they are buying our bonds.
Well, that's certainly true. It's not the only reason.
Okay.
And
I grant
nobody
that.
really knows how much of the story it is. The fact of the matter is that tax revenue from big corporations has been going down over the years.
That's separate.
And
I was talking about corporations. I was talking about individuals. Of course, you got to remember when you talk about corporations that don't pay taxes, a lot of them haven't made any money, and that may be the reason. I think the question is the issue is the profitable corporations that don't pay any taxes. That's the legitimate, truly legitimate concern. But as far as the individuals, I wouldn't want us, I don't know what the effect would be, for instance, of imposing higher minimum taxes on individuals in the high income brackets, if that affects significantly those individuals who rely on their income entirely from municipal bonds, or largely from municipal bonds, if it would begin to make the purchase of municipal bonds unattractive because they were paying enough in a minimum tax that they might as well go for the income. The higher income you get someplace else, even though it's taxable.
okay, thank you very much. Any other comments on this? All right, we'll leave it for the moment. Moving on, Mayor McNulty, you have a brief report to make on behalf of your Revenue Sharing Subcommittee.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. On behalf of the Conference of Mayors, I have testified before House and Senate committees on behalf of revenue sharing, and I have to report to you that we are in a very serious situation in the lack of support that has been evidenced in both the House and the Senate for the continuation of revenue sharing. And the chairman of the committee, Mr. Weiss of New York, recommended strongly that we communicate what we do with revenue sharing in our communities to our constituencies in order to elicit more support from our own constituents in order to preserve the program, because it is in dire jeopardy, and that is one of the reasons why I believe we are about to entertain a resolution to continue revenue sharing as resolution number 1 of this committee. It is a crisis situation, and no one should be disabused of the fact that it is a crisis situation for the cities of this country.
Mayor, as we understand it, the Senate is recommending full funding for fiscal year '86, and the House a 25% cut, and then both are recommending that the program be terminated the year after.
Right.
So those cities, for example, we have $22 million of revenue sharing in police, fire, our railway, park and rec, and that just drops a year later to 0. And I wonder how many of the cities at this table have revenue sharing. But maybe we could just quickly go around. That might be very useful. for everybody to know how revenue sharing money is spent. Would you like to do that? Go around the table quickly, and why don't you begin, Mayor Isaac? Why don't you begin? How do you have it, and how do you use it?
Don't use it in police and fire salaries, I'll guarantee you that. But selected contracted services, special projects, generally how we use it. $3 million in a general fund budget of approximately $95 million.
Okay.
In Scranton, Pennsylvania, because of Pennsylvania's compulsory arbitration laws for public employees, especially police and fire, we use every dime of it for police and fire salaries because the arbitrators do not consider ability to pay when they give the ability to raise.
In Madison, Wisconsin, we divide it up 2/3 into capital improvements, and primarily we use it in the mass transit area where we have one of the most efficient systems in the country, and 1/3 goes into general operating revenues. We have $3 million of revenue sharing out of about an $85 million budget.
Joliet, Illinois, excuse me, we use it basically for capital improvements, but the question always comes up, it goes into the general fund, it goes into the pair of pants, so to speak, and what pocket it comes out of to go. It could be considered, are you paying firemen, are you paying policemen, and when it goes into the general fund, we say that it's going to capital improvements, but it all comes out of the same basic fund.
Santa Ana, California, we've been using general revenue sharing principally for capital projects and with some experimental efforts such as downtown foot patrol for policing practices, but it's been principally one-shot capital projects.
In Ogden, Utah, it started out as capital projects, specifically in emergency type things. It is ending up in a general fund, and we can easily point out that it does end up in salaries of firemen.
In Savannah, Georgia, contrary to Mayor Isaac's guaranteeing that he did use it for police and fire, I guarantee you we reduced the property taxes to support police and fire with our revenue sharing monies.
In Meridian, Mississippi, we get about $900,000 of a $14 million budget, and we use it primarily for capital improvements and to match other government grants with our share of the matching monies.
In Provo, Utah, we get about $1.5 million, $50 million budget. It's strictly for capital improvements and capital equipment.
In Westport, Connecticut, we get about $350,000 out of a $45 million budget. We use it for various things from year to year. At the present, we're using it for fire hydrant costs. However, I would like to point out, as others have, that it's just another means of reducing local taxes. What you use it for is kind of a game that you can play. It's merely a reduction in local taxes because it's put into the general fund.
In Greenwich, Connecticut, we get approximately $700,000. We put that into our retirement fund, and obviously that's going to have to be made up if it's eliminated. One of the things I'm here to speak against is doing that.
In toda Puerto Rico, we don't have any...
No revenue sharing?
No revenue sharing.
Thank you.
In Norfolk, Virginia, basically special projects and capital funds, but the special projects sometimes tend to get carried along and become permanent projects.
Thank you.
Minneapolis, we have an operating tax-supported fund of about $175 million. Our revenue sharing is about $6 million. It's folded in as a part of our general operating funds.
Our revenue sharing fund is $12 million.
Henry, indicate your city.
Pardon?
Your city.
I can't swear for the
Milwaukee. The distinguished mayor from Milwaukee.
Pardon me, Madam Chairman. My name is Henry Meyer, Mayor of Milwaukee. We receive $12 million, and it goes into our general fund. And we haven't built a single swimming pool out of it. As a matter of fact, as Proxmire charges, that's what we use them for. We don't have any swimming pools built by the city of Milwaukee. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you.
Lee Alexander from Syracuse. We've used the funds received from revenue sharing, approximating $28 million since inception, to do as John Rousakis has, the second best Greek-American mayor in the country. We reduce property taxes by paying the salaries of our firemen.
Mary Bonner, Dunedin, Florida. We use the revenue sharing for capital improvements. Example of a brand new police building, which also serves for all our planning services.
In Juneau, Alaska, general revenue sharing is not targeted for a specific project. It is rolled into our general fund and, as a result, reduces our mill levy.
In Sunnyvale, California, similar to Colorado Springs, we have a policy of not using federal monies for essential city services. And in fact, use our $1 million a year in revenue sharing to fund outside social service agencies that the city ordinarily would not be involved with, but because we have the money, we help them.
In Albuquerque, we receive approximately $7 million in revenue sharing out of a $150 million general operation budget. We show it going mostly to our fire department, but of course that expenditure within the fire department just keeps down other general fund expenditures, and if we lost it, we would make it up by reduction throughout our general fund budget. It consists of about 5% of our budget. We would have to, by various other means, raising taxes where possible, and most western and southern cities are very limited of having the ability to raise taxes. One reason we probably have lower taxes because we can't raise it, so we would have to make up that 5% by general tax and service increases in other areas.
Joe Riley, Charleston, South Carolina. We receive $2.2 million. It has been used for our police and fire departments in a time when they needed substantial strengthening. And one of the great benefits of that has been a substantial reduction in our crime rate over the years and a beefing up of those two critical services. We also use it to fund various social service activities, many of which are run by organizations that are not a part of city government, but without our help wouldn't be able to do the kinds of jobs that they do. We estimate that if we lose revenue sharing, it will cause either a 17% increase in our property tax rate or substantial pressures to reduce some elements of our budget. Like most cities, there is no place to cut in police and fire and sanitation, those basic services. What that will do is create pressure to cut back on the more tangential but very important areas like social services and the arts. I would resist cutting in both of those areas, but I think that will create the pressure to cut in those areas or increase property taxes, both of which alternatives I think are just unrealistic.
In Galveston, Texas, we are a Proposition 13 type city. We have a tax limitation, and I have absolutely insisted that we not use any revenue sharing money for any operating expenditures in the city. And we are using it for capital expenditures, one-time street programs, water, sewer, and we have bought some things like garbage trucks. But I'm also a mayor who testified before one of the congressional committees and feel very strongly that even those of us that are not using it for operating expenditures are going to have to find other ways to fund those programs, and we are going to have to do without capital expenditures in our city if this program is cut, because we do have limitations on our taxability.
Don Erickson, Cheyenne. Like many of the other mayors, our revenue sharing money goes into the general fund. We don't use it for salaries. However, if our capital items weren't receiving the revenue monies, we'd probably have less money for salaries. We have considered revenue sharing as soft money that eventually was going to go away. It isn't money that's going to continue. And we're prepared in 1986 to have that as our last year. I think many of us around this table, as the Mayor McNulty indicated, it's not a crisis, it's a disaster. But we better be prepared for it because we're going to lose it, in my opinion. I know my 3 delegates in Congress, they voted against revenue sharing back 4 years ago for the state. And they indicated to me at that time that it was on the way out, and we better be prepared for what is eventually going to happen.
When Moses, Fort Wayne, we have approximately $2 million in revenue sharing, which we've tried hard to leverage. We give, for instance, nearly $1 million to our Chamber of Commerce for economic development. They, in turn, have added nearly $8 million to that. With those dollars, we've been able to attract substantial business to the Midwest, most recent being a $500 million General Motors state-of-the-art truck manufacturing plant, and a tremendous opportunity for our area. We use it for victims' assistance of crime. It funds a small part of that. It allows us to bring in 8 to 9 volunteers so that those poor citizens that are victims have a way to be treated. We use it for minimum housing to bring up the standards in our neighborhoods and to tear down those houses that are impossible to bring up. That dramatically increases the property value. We found this to be a very good tool to increase the quality of life and the job opportunities in Fort Wayne in a very leveraged way, and it will be a significant loss to us.
Thank you very much, Mayor.
For the mayors to undertake. And I so move that number 3 as amended.
Moved by Mayor Sensenbrenner, seconded by Mayor Moses. Mayor Moses, do you wish to comment on it?
No, I'm just opening up for discussion. The last discussion was so interesting, I thought we ought to get on with this.
All right. Mayor Mercer?
Yes. I'm a little concerned about Clause 12, where we argue for continuing to allow bank deduction of carrying costs on municipal bonds at the same time that we're talking about our concern that corporations are not paying enough in taxes. Again, I guess what we're saying here, well, sure, there is a deduction for corporations that benefits us, and therefore keep it. I'm sure that argument could be made for each and every provision of the corporate tax code. Well, in some instances, it's going to be a stronger argument than in others, but a lot of the things that cause a problem of the diminishing a portion of the federal budget that is being funded by corporations are these very worthwhile deductions that are in there. And I think it's a little incongruous to argue on the one hand, we've got problems with corporations not paying their fair share. On the other hand, be sure we keep this particular deduction, and I'm sure there are others that we're going to want to keep too. But I've got another concern that is not addressed in here, and I don't really want to propose an amendment, but I just want to raise the issue. I'm particularly concerned in my community about what the tax code would do to the construction of rental housing. The cost of housing is very expensive where I live. The only thing that really is anywhere near as affordable is rental housing, if you're talking about affordable to the middle income taxpayer. And yet my understanding is that some of the changes would stretch out the depreciation schedule from 18 years to 28 years. And I've seen estimates that if we're going to continue to have the private market provide rental housing, that means the rents would probably have to go up 30 to 40% in order to make it as profitable now, as profitable in the future as it is now on the proposed tax code. That's a very important concern. Frankly, it's more important to me to see rental housing constructed in my community than to get revenue sharing. It's just a matter of, the way my particular community falls out in the scheme of things. Nonetheless, I recognize that's probably not a major concern to many of the communities in the country, and therefore I'm not going to ask that the U.S. Conference of Mayors go on record supporting my particular problem. But I thought I'd be remiss if I didn't raise it. In California, but generally, and in my area and a few others specifically, housing costs. And then we're talking about rental housing costs. It's a major problem. It's getting it constructed so that people can live in the housing.
Thank you, Mayor. All right. Then, does everybody have this? It's white paper. It's entitled Deductibility of State and Local Taxes. Sensenbrenner, Moses. Moved by Sensenbrenner, seconded by Moses. Takes a 2/3 vote. I'm going to call for your hands to be raised. All those in favor of this motion, please raise your hand. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Rusakis? 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. All those opposed? Oh, it's unanimous. Well, that was easy. That was a surprise. Good. All right, that motion is adopted. Next motion is resolution number 4. That's it. Yeah. Yes, Mayor Mercer?
I guess I'm not certain what we were just voting on. Was
Voted on this on a white piece
to take it up? You need, wait a minute. You need, as I understand, you need a 2/3 vote to decide to consider it.
Oh, all right.
My
You're
understanding
correct.
was we were deciding to consider it.
You are correct. We've decided to consider it. Let's consider it.
I would like to consider it.
Does that mean you want to make a statement?
Speak to it.
Oh, all right.
Okay. I come from a high-tax state, California, and certainly the loss of deductibility would impact my citizens. And I've got some, I guess, philosophical problems with eliminating the deduction for state and local taxes on federal taxes. But I will say that I haven't been persuaded that tax reform can happen without the elimination of this deduction. It's a hard choice, and I'm open to if somebody wants to argue the other side, but every argument that I have heard says that without the elimination of this deduction, there is no tax reform. And I can tell you, my citizens are much more concerned about tax reform generally than specifically about the deduction of state and local taxes. They don't really look at it like I might as a philosophical federalism type argument. Their concern, frankly, is much more with fairness in the tax code. And I've talked to people that figure that they may end up paying higher taxes. Some of them will pay higher taxes, but they are so concerned about the tax code. And everything that I've heard indicates that people cheating on their income taxes, the incidence of that is increasing significantly. I mean, it is going up. People are very unhappy, and I can tell you, I am not going to stand between tax reform and my citizenry, even if it means that they will end up paying some more. I think some of them will. Most of them won't. Some of them will, and I'm prepared to face the ones that will. Unless somebody wants to make the case that you can have major tax reform. You can lower the tax brackets significantly, you can simplify the income tax, and you can still have the deductibility of state and local taxes.
That's a very good question. Let's try to get you some answers to that question. Mayor Isaacs and then Mayor Sensenbrenner.
The way I get the argument then, John, that we tie tax reform to what we may philosophically be opposed to as far as the deductibility. I personally feel that that's unjust not to permit that deduction, because once again the public sees the services. They don't always know where they come from what level of government, and to be taxed on that which you have to give up for services just seems unfair. Now there have been many studies. I think the last time I argued this before a committee, I said when I was in law school, I was told by the first professor that I'll be flunked if I ever say it's unfair. But I think this is unfair, and just because it picks up the biggest chunk of money in a revenue-neutral operation doesn't give us, or at least I don't feel that's a good, compelling reason.
Mayor Sensenbrenner.
That's basically where the committee task force wound up yesterday. We individually have proposals, but we didn't want to have the headline read, Mayor's proposed more tax on imported oil, or more tax on corporations, or more tax on this or that. There are ways to get from A to B. This isn't the only way. There are a whole long list, and so we wanted to concentrate on what impact it would be on our citizens who live in cities and stand up for an unfair proposal.
If I understand, Mayor Mercer, that the revenue from the deductibility could reach about $40 billion by 1990. And that you're right, that this is the heart. It uses that to be able to give the rebates that in essence result in a chart going like this with virtually everybody getting a tax reduction. and this is the White House's document. I think if I hear Joe Sensenbrenner correctly, what he's saying is that there ought to be a certain element of negotiation in this, because the large tax states lose much more than they gain by it, and that there are other areas to negotiate to fill that gap. What nobody really knows is if you took some of those brackets and just moved them like 35 to 37% at the top, how many billions that produces. Or if you just moved a couple of other brackets by a couple of percent, what that produces. And I think those are some of the things that need to be made public so that the Congress, as well as those of us that are interested, can really see what kind of viable alternatives are.
Otherwise, they're not going to be met. They're not going to be met at the federal level. They're usually not met well at the state level, but they certainly come to us at the local level. And so when we're talking about losing our capacity to finance these services, I think we have to treat that with a great deal of concern, as I know we do.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, Mayor. Mayor Mercer, go ahead.
Playing devil's advocate, a role I guess I've been. I just hate to see everybody stampede in one direction. It's the contrarian in me that says whatever group I'm with, I'm going to test their arguments. All right, let's test this argument of the ability of states and local governments to raise taxes if you eliminate the deductibility. Well, that may be a problem at the state level in California, and I think California is a legitimate area to look at because it is one of the high tax states, and it's the one of the examples we talk about on this issue. This problem may be a difficult one at the state level, I'm not certain, but at the local level, I don't see it a problem at all. The property taxes in California, for instance, are frozen. Nobody's increasing property taxes. We don't have local income taxes. Maybe there's some cities, some of the large ones in California, I don't think so. I've never heard of a local income tax, so that's not an issue. And then the sales tax, we just increased the sales tax at the county level from 6.5% to 7%. And that extra 7% was used to fund county transportation needs. And it was a difficult campaign, but the citizens voted for it. And not once in the entire course of the debate did anyone raise the argument, vote yes on Measure A because that extra half cent's going to be deductible. The sales tax is not an issue with respect to deductibility. People don't think in terms of the deductibility of a sales tax and therefore support it. And I don't really think that they say, well, I'm against taxes, so I'd vote no on this, except, yeah, you know, it's deductible, so I'll vote yes. They either are philosophically against taxes and are going to vote against them no matter what you do, or they want the service and are willing to pay for it. And I really, at the local level, don't see, in a high-tax state like California, this being a factor in our ability to raise revenue. Because a lot of the revenue comes from user fees and all kinds of things that are not subject to the deduction even now.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Riley?
Well, every state is somewhat different. The great problem with this, I think, is for the central cities, and it relates to their property tax. In the central city, usually the property tax is higher than in the surrounding communities. It's not because the central city is a spendthrift, but rather the central city usually has huge areas of tax-exempt property. The central city has colleges and universities and hospitals and all of those things that inure greatly to the benefit of the metropolitan area. The central city has most of the poor people. The central city has the housing projects. The central city has, therefore, a limited tax base and a lot of burdens, and the central city's taxes are higher than the surrounding area. If you remove the deductibility, you heighten the ability for people to shop within the metropolitan area in terms of where to live or where to locate, because the taxes have become relatively higher because you've lost the deductibility. The deductibility of local taxes is really a tremendous blow to the solar plexus. of city governments. And if you throw that on top of the loss of revenue sharing, you've got a double whammy that is really going to hurt most of the central cities. And California may be the exception. If you've got uniform property taxes and relatively high sales taxes, the deductibility may not be important. But for most of the cities in our country, central cities, whether it's a small central city or New York City, the loss of this deduction is really going to be a serious problem.
Mayor Mercer, let me just give you a specific. As I understand it, you can deduct if you own an apartment building, but you can't deduct a single-family home. And I think that's a basic and a very wrong inconsistency in this process, because to say if you have revenue-producing property, you can make the deduction on the basis that real estate depreciates, but you can't do it on the basis if you own a home, is to single out the single-family homeowner and say you're the only one that can't deduct. So that's just one other specific. Any other? Yes, Mayor? Okay, on the motion, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion is carried. On the resolution, all those in favor, as amended, all those in favor, please say aye. 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 Opposed? The resolution is adopted. Okay, resolution number 4, tax deductibility of business, lodging, meal, and entertainment expenses. Mayor Morial, I understand. Welcome to your committee. We're delighted to have you here.
And members of this committee, I'm sure that you have read the resolution, and I will not labor you with a rereading of the resolution, simply to say that it requests a reconsideration of the proposal as provided for in the Treasury Department's recommendations on tax deductibility of lodging and entertainment expenses and business meals. As is presently proposed by the Treasury Department, the daily expense of meals and lodging in connection with business travel would be limited to 200% of the allowed federal employee per diem. That rate currently ranges from $50 to $75 depending upon the cost of living in an area. This would limit expenditures in many of our cities, which thrive on business activity and on tourism as a major industry, to approximately $150 to cover all room costs, meals, gratuities, and taxes. And I'm sure that some of you will experience when you leave this hotel that $150 a day was inadequate to cover all of the things that you've expended in the course of this meeting. Though it doesn't apply to us. All entertainment expenses would be curtailed except meals conducted in a clear business setting. Deduction for business meals would be limited to $10 per person for breakfast, $15 for lunch, $25 for dinner, inclusive of tax and tips. I've asked that you be provided with a copy of an executive summary of a study done by the Chase Econometrics, which will indicate to you the impact of this proposal by the Treasury Department on our respective cities. Many of the cities represented on this committee are key convention cities, and if not key convention cities, they certainly engage in a number of business activities, such as Mayor Mercer's city, which has a number of business persons coming in and out of his city on occasion because he is in Silicon Valley in California. But this study indicates that imposing a 50% tax deductibility limit beginning in 1986 on business entertainment, meals, purchases exceeding Treasury's proposed per person ceiling for breakfast, lunch, and dinner would reduce business marketing meals purchases by approximately 8% in 1986. That employment would be reduced by approximately 140,000 jobs in 1986, of which 125,000 would be in eating and drinking places. In 1987, the number of U.S. jobs lost would increase to approximately 190,000, of which some 139,000 would be in eating and drinking places. Net federal revenue would be reduced in 1986 by about $570 million, and in 1987 by about $800 million. Net state and local revenues would be reduced in 1986 by approximately $540 million, and in 1987 by $860 million. I would urge that this resolution be adopted along with resolution number 3 on tax policy, which is before you as well. If you haven't taken that one up thus far, I apologize for being late, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mayor Morial. Is there a motion to move the resolution? Mayor Alexander moves, Mayor McNulty seconds. If there's no discussion, Mayor Isaac and then Mayor Moses.
I kind of enjoy this one, Dutch. I'd like to quote from John F. Kennedy, if I could. The time has come when our tax laws should cease their encouragement of luxury spending as a charge on the federal treasury. The slogan, "It's deductible," should pass from our scene. Now, I just couldn't, I kind of enjoyed this article. I don't know if anybody read it. It was, it's how the Democrats learned to love the 3-martini lunch. And I don't want to be partisan now. I don't want to be partisan. But all I can say is I oppose it, and I'm going to call this resolution, Dutch, the 3-martini trickle down.
Oh, you're painful. That concludes your comment.
That's it.
Oh, that's it. All right. Mayor Mayor Moses and then Mayor Mercer.
I get awful nervous being on the same side as Bob. But I'm not convinced that we as mayors should be in favor of keeping the large lunch deductibilities or lodging or meals. I just don't think that the majority of citizens in cities are in favor of this, or want this, or understand it. And I just feel rather strongly that this is not the type of proposal that we should pull out, have an individual resolution on, and say, we're in favor of the amount of dollars people want to spend on lodgings and meals and entertainment. That if we are to be serious about being any help in the effort to keep this deficit down and our fiscal responsibility as a nation on a prudent course, I don't see how we can be in favor of keeping deductibilities for these types of things. And I glanced through the report that came out here prepared for the National Restaurant Association, and I understand that, but I remember reading the Wall Street Journal that went through in the last couple of days an article about how nobody's going to stop eating meals because they aren't deductible, and they might eat them a little cheaper, or they might not deduct them. They might have to pay more taxes, but most business is going to get done whether they're deductible or not. And I think this sends entirely the wrong signal to the nation that we mayors just aren't going to give up anything at all. And this is probably the minimum, and in most people's minds, unfortunately, probably very close to what Mayor Isaacs has described it.
Mayor Mercer.
You're right. This does impact my city. Sunnyvale's the home of more electronics companies than any other city in the world, 331. You can imagine the amount of business travel we get. Not much in the way of tourists, but an awful lot of business travel. But I got to tell you, I'm trying to change the Republican image, and I don't think we ought to be supporting more tax breaks for the rich, particularly at this time. I wouldn't favor eliminating the deductibility of meals and hotel expenses, but I think putting a reasonable cap is certainly appropriate. Now, if I were asked to draw the line, I don't think I would draw it at $10 for a breakfast, or $15 for a lunch, or $25 for a dinner, tax and tip included. I think I'd increase it a little bit based on my experience. But I like the philosophy. I like the point that's being made, that you put a limit on this. You don't say you go out and you spend $75 to $100 per person and the federal government's going to give you a subsidy for that. That troubles me. And no, I'm not unsympathetic to what you're trying to do. Thank you.
Mayor Alexander.
I can't help but envy those who can afford those very expensive lunches that you're talking about, but I'm not sure that I would go so far as to say that 3 martini lunch is bad. The only problem I have with it is that when I have 3 martinis, I notice that everybody around me gets nasty and I have to hit them. I don't think it's abused as much as people think. I'm more concerned, let's forget for just a moment those who may abuse it from time to time. I'm more concerned about what Dutch alluded to, the impact it would have on the restaurant trade, which is an important source of employment in my city. And most of the restaurants aren't cutting it in my city. They're barely getting by. And my fear is that if you eliminate this deduction, that an awful lot of them are going to go down.
Coming from the city who enjoys a variety of this activity with major conventions and tourists in Savannah, Georgia, I guess I should support the resolution, but I can't. I agree with Mayor Mercer's thoughts on limiting this deductibility. I don't think anything's going to happen to the private sector's competitiveness here. I think it's going to continue. I don't think it's going to reduce it at all. And in light of the importance that we've placed on the preceding resolutions, I think it would reduce that, coming from the U.S. Conference of Mayors, the importance we place on the preceding if we do include this with that package. So I would support limiting, but not continuing as is.
Okay,
Where are you on this resolution?
I oppose the resolution.
just before we vote, I'm going to have to oppose it too, just because I think that how can you have tax reform and maintain this kind of deduction? And I don't really, I'm a big restaurant city, a big travel city, big restaurant and hotel association, but I really think this is mandatory. I mean, I think some of these deductions have reached the point where they're ridiculous, and if we're to have any credibility in tax reform, you've got to support the removal of this kind of thing. On the motion, which is to adopt the resolution, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. No? No. Afraid the motion is defeated. Thank you, Mayor Morial. Thank you. For me, that was a tough one. A lot of us would have liked to have given you the vote. Okay, the next one. Resolution number 5, technology transfer. Mayor Moses. There's a motion to adopt by Rousakis.
I've got 2 additions to it.
You want to hold that up?
They're brief, but for those that are not familiar with technology transfer, it is the $40 billion research and development effort that the federal government each year does in federal laboratories. The goal is to make that available as much as is proper to local governments. And this has been a bipartisan, almost apple pie type of issue. At the hearing at Congress, House Minority Leader Bob Michael came over and spoke in favor of it, as did a number of us Democratic mayors. And the whole goal is just to open this process up, make it available, develop a network so that the small and middle-sized businesses can take advantage of these research and development opportunities, as well as some of the bigger. The bigger are utilizing it, but this would enhance the availability to them, too, of those research facilities.
Mayor, thank you. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion is adopted.
Research and development coming up for everybody.
In my area, technology transfer is what the KGB does.
Okay.
Get us some of it, then we'd appreciate it instead of the other direction.
The next item on the agenda is the consideration of the urban policy report. You have a resolution which is number 6 in your packet, and this is authored by Mayor Berry, Cook, Milner, and Alexander. Is there a motion? Moved by Mayor Alexander. Is there a second? Seconded by Mayor. Is your hand up, John, to second it? No. Well, I'll second it then. Is there discussion?
What do we second?
To adopt the resolution.
Let me read the resolve, the last resolve. The National Urban Policy Report is a valuable resource to be employed in the future development of urban policy positions on behalf of the nation's mayors. So what we're doing is
No, we're accepting the report. That's that this committee accepts these specific sections of the report as a resource to be employed in the future development of urban policy positions.
we're accepting it as information.
That's correct.
Resolution. We're not adopting the positions or the statements of the policy report.
That is correct, as I understand the resolution.
Put it in the library, right?
Well, let me, as I understand it, a great deal of work has been developed in the formation of these reports. They're very factual, they're very thoughtful. It's a very good reference. It's being, the thrust of Mayor Berry's resolution is to ask the conference to accept the report.
Well, as long as it identifies the problems, there's a great editorial comment in there. There's some recommendations made. There are positions that I can support and that I cannot support. So since we're not going to take them point by point and make them a policy or a position of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, but merely to accept the report, I can support that.
Good, then you'll second the motion.
It's
already seconded. I did it. Right. Thank you for those astute comments. Mayor Isaac.
I'm not going to talk about it. I put everything out in a piece of paper and send it to everyone. So, but the only comment is I think if we were to go to a national urban policy approach, similar to the National League of Cities, that's a major change. It ought to be discussed by the executive committee, by everyone else, and then updated every year. And if that's the way we were going, I would have to oppose it. If it's a piece of resource material, then we all have our choice whether we want to access that particular resource or not. So if it's just to accept as material, I don't see any problem with that.
I think that's all it is.
That's correct. That's all it is. Mayor Mercer?
Yes, I'd like to make sure that the press clearly understands what would be happening if the U.S. Conference of Mayors adopts this resolution and others regarding the work that is before us. I'm afraid, my concern is that they'll read this thing and say that's the position of the U.S. Conference of Mayors. And I look through here, and I look on page 1, section 3, and I read a quote from Jesse Jackson that says, "The people are crying out not for social service, but for fundamental social change." Jesse Jackson's never talked to the citizens of my community. They are not crying out for fundamental social change. They're crying out for social service if they're crying out for anything. Frankly, they get a lot of services, and I don't know that they're really crying for anything other than affordable housing. But I mean, there are a lot of things in here that are just categorically do not reflect my constituency or my own personal views, and I suspect are not in sync with what a lot of people in the country would say, and I'm prepared to start talking about those. If this is going to be sold as the policy statement, the position of the United States Conference of Mayors. If, on the other hand, it is clearly marked as a resource, a point of view that addresses a lot of concerns and makes some recommendations regarding an urban development bank and things like that that reflect a legitimate point of view, albeit one not necessarily endorsed by all the mayors, fine. I've got no problem with it. I just don't want this thing mispackaged, mislabeled in the future, and I'm concerned about that.
Well, I think everything we've said so far, Mayor Mercer, is to state it just as it is, which is to accept it as a resource document. Mayor Alexander?
Paragraph 7 makes it very clear that it's being offered by Mayor Barry as a resource document, and that it had been previously submitted to the chairs of all the standing committees, and there had been some dispute as to whether it would reflect the policy statement of the U.S. Conference of Mayors or not. And Mayor Barry has made an exceptionally strong effort to indicate that it's being offered as a resource document. It's the work, considerable work, substantial work wants to make it available to the conference, and that's in the spirit in which it's being offered.
In what spirit will be offered to the committees of Congress that he probably would testify before and put it out there? Would he say this is a document of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, and the presumption would be it reflects policy? If he wishes to say it's a document that he drafted and it's sitting, you know, at the U.S. Conference of Mayors, for anyone who's interested in reading his point of view, I've got no problem with that. I'm really have some trepidation about how this is going to be marketed in the future. I've got no problem with adopting this resolution if it means and will continue to mean what it is we're saying it means. But I just, based on past experience, have some real concerns about what will be said when it is laid on the table in a congressional hearing room.
I'd like to comment on this as well. It certainly is an excellent report, and it has particular statements in here that I am unable to accept. However, I understand where it's coming from. I wonder, though, if it is really appropriate for us to take resource documents. Suppose a mayor in some other part of the country had a resource document to give to the U.S. Conference of Mayors, make the document available and publish it or whatever. But for us to, as a conference, to adopt that we are accepting a resource document doesn't appear to be appropriate. I would have to vote against the resolution. Not that I'm voting against someone giving a presentation of their particular views about urban policy, but because I don't believe it's appropriate for the conference to so have a resolution doing that.
For future development of urban policy positions to use this piece. I think if we added that, it would address some of the concerns that have been raised.
It's a motion.
I would move that.
Seconded by Mayor McNulty. Discussion on the motion? Would you like to repeat it again, John?
It would say, the Mayor's National Urban Policy Report as a valuable resource to be employed if desired in future considerations of urban policy positions on behalf of the nation's mayors.
Does that satisfy you, Mayor Mercer?
All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Yes, what is the motion is carried. What is your question?
On the paragraph 6, it states in the last whereas that this committee has in fact reviewed the document to ensure that it conforms to adopted conference policy. Does it in fact conform to adopted conference policy, or is that something that we really need to eliminate?
Ms. Bannon says it does. Mayor Isaac?
Well, I have great confidence in the staff, and I'm sure that every single policy that, you know, lives on forever in this organization has been checked through in detail. But I think the point he's trying to make, if we're accepting it as a report, maybe we shouldn't go out on a limb to say this fits into every policy. And also, you've got to see that we will be changing policies in the future. So if it's a resource material, there's no need for us to pass at this short session on that issue. Now, I like the discussion that's been going on. I could be talked out of accepting this report. In the interest of diplomacy, I'm glad to go along with accepting it. I don't intend to use it a great deal, but I appreciate the position that we have here. If the word policy were taken out in some case and just say a report on urban matters or whatever, it might take away the possibility, even in the title, that it could be sold or used incorrectly. Not that anybody would do it. But maybe that might solve some of the problem. We could say this is a report. We haven't reviewed everything. And it's a valuable resource, and we accept it. Want to change the title?